At the Grand Midsummer Gala of Blackwood Hall in 1887, Lady Alara Montague lingered beneath a towering marble archway entwined with ivy and blood-red roses, the flickering glow of 1,000 chandeliers turning her golden hair into a halo of molten light. Intricate braids crowned her head, with soft curls escaping to frame a face of porcelain delicacy, high cheekbones, full lips curved in quiet amusement, and hazel eyes that gleamed with the restless intelligence society found so unsettling. Her emerald satin gown whispered against the polished floor, molding to a figure that had launched a dozen proposals and twice as many jealous whispers, yet she wore her beauty like a shield, not a lure. She idly twirled an ivory lace fan, not for cool air but to hide the sharp smile that came whenever she deciphered the room's hidden currents. At 24, Alara had mastered the art of observing without being observed, cataloging motives and masks with the cool precision of a scholar dissecting rare specimens. Beauty opened every door, her mind, unfortunately, often closed them again. "You're doing it again," whispered her cousin Lydia, materializing at her elbow with 2 flutes of champagne, eyes bright with mischief. "That look, like you're stripping away everyone's varnish and finding nothing but moths beneath." Alara accepted the glass, her voice low and amused. "How can I resist when motives hang so obviously? Baroness Vale is already circling Lord Carstairs' revised will. Within the hour, someone will probe our host about those Kimberley diamonds everyone pretends he doesn't own." Lydia shivered deliciously. "Speaking of the host, have you seen Earl Damien Ravenscroft yet? They say he returned from Ceylon richer, darker, and far more dangerous. Men twice his age reconsider contracts after one glance from him." Alara had heard every rumor. Damien, 34, architect of railways that bound empires and plantations that bled fortunes from spice, tea, and silence. He had shunned London for years, only to return last season cloaked in an aura that left debutantes breathless and dowagers clutching pearls. Then she saw him. Across the ballroom, half-shadowed beside French doors that opened onto moonlit gardens, he stood motionless amid the glittering tide. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in unrelieved black that drank the light, raven hair swept back from features carved with ruthless elegance. His eyes, glacial gray, swept the room with lethal indifference until, impossibly, they found hers. For one suspended heartbeat, the noise faded. Curiosity flared in that frozen gaze, or perhaps recognition of another soul that refused to bend. Lydia exhaled shakily. Mercy. The rumors were merciful. "He's only a man," Alara murmured, though her pulse betrayed her with a sudden, reckless thunder. "A man who could ruin empires before breakfast and shatter hearts by supper." The majordomo's staff struck marble thrice, the sound slicing through laughter. "My lords, ladies, and gentlemen, his lordship requests your presence. Dinner is served." As the assembly flowed toward the dining hall in strict order of precedence, Alara felt those gray eyes track her once more, a fleeting brush, like the promise of storm against skin. She lifted her chin and met them without flinching. Whatever tempest brewed tonight, she was already walking toward its center. And heaven help her, she could not wait to feel the lightning. The dining hall of Blackwood Hall gleamed like a jewel box opened beneath starlight. A single, endless table of polished mahogany stretched beneath 3 glittering chandeliers, their crystals scattering prisms across silver aprons bursting with hothouse orchids and white roses. Footmen in scarlet livery stood at silent attention along the walls, while the assembled aristocracy, dukes, viscounts, dowagers dripping diamonds, settled into their appointed places with the solemn ceremony of a coronation. Lady Alara Montague found herself seated 3/4 down the table, between her cousin Lydia and an elderly viscountess who immediately began lamenting the declining quality of French lace. Across from them sat a young baronet whose gaze had lingered too long on Alara's décolletage. she met his eyes once, coolly, and watched him flush and look away. At the head of the table, beneath a portrait of some long-dead Ravenscroft ancestor in Tudor armor, sat the Earl himself. Damien Ravenscroft presided with the effortless authority of a man who had never needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. Candle flames reflected in his grey eyes like chips of winter sea ice. He spoke little, answering direct questions with clipped precision, yet every word carried weight enough to silence neighboring conversation. To his right sat Viscount Harlan Blackthorne and his wife, Lady Beatrice. Harlan was a man of middling years and excessive charm, forever laughing at his own jests. Beatrice possessed the kind of brittle, expensive beauty that required constant maintenance, ebony hair piled high, emeralds at her throat that matched her gown exactly. Elara had always found the couple faintly unsettling, though she could never quite name why. Perhaps it was the way Harlan's compliments felt like inventory, or how Beatrice's laughter arrived a heartbeat too late, as though calculated. The first courses passed in a murmur of polite nothings: turtle soup, delicate soles in cream sauce, removes of venison and asparagus. Wine flowed, claret, hock, champagne, poured by watchful footmen who never allowed a glass to remain empty. Elara sipped sparingly. She preferred to keep her wits sharp, especially in rooms full of predators wearing smiles. Lydia chattered beside her about the latest scandal involving an opera singer and a married marquis, but Elara's attention drifted, as it always did, to the subtle choreography of power playing out around her. She noticed how Viscount Harlan leaned toward the Earl, gesturing expansively about railway shares and Ceylon, his voice carrying just far enough to draw admiring glances from lesser guests. She noticed how Lady Beatrice rose gracefully during the remove, excusing herself to speak with a friend farther down the table. She noticed, because Elara noticed everything, the way Beatrice's gloved hand dipped briefly into the hidden pocket of her emerald skirts as she passed behind Damien's chair. It was the smallest motion. A flicker. A practiced sleight that might have gone unseen by anyone less observant. But Elara saw. She saw the tiny crystal vial, no longer than a lady's finger, withdrawn and uncorked with impossible smoothness. She saw the clear liquid, 3 drops, no more, tipped into the Earl's untouched glass of claret while Harlan's laughter swelled to mask any sound. She saw Beatrice slip the vial away again, her expression never altering, her smile serene as she continued past the chair. Time fractured. Elara's heart slammed against her ribs like a trapped bird. The room's chatter became distant, muffled, as though she were underwater. She watched Damien reach for his glass, long fingers closing around the stem with absent grace. She did not think. She simply acted. Rising so swiftly her chair scraped loudly against the parquet, Elara crossed the distance in 4 determined strides. Gasps rippled outward like circles in a pond. Silverware paused midair. Every titled head turned. "Don't," she said, her voice low but carrying in the sudden hush. Her hand shot out, striking the glass just as it neared his lips. Claret exploded across the pristine damask cloth in a blooming stain of crimson. Crystal struck the table with a sharp crack but held. Wine dripped from Damien Ravenscroft's fingers like fresh blood. Silence descended, absolute and suffocating. Then the Earl looked up. Up close, his eyes were not merely grey, they were storm-cloud and steel, fathomless and unreadable. For a moment the entire hall seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the infamous Ravenscroft temper to erupt. Instead, he studied her with unnerving intensity, as though memorizing every line of her face. "Lady Elara Montague," he said at last, his voice a low, velvet rumble that sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. "That was my wine. It was poisoned." The words left her lips before caution could silence them. A collective gasp tore through the assembly. Somewhere, a fork clattered against porcelain. Lady Beatrice's voice rose in perfectly modulated outrage. "How extraordinary! Your lordship, I fear the young lady has indulged too freely. Perhaps the heat." "I am neither intoxicated nor mistaken," Elara cut in, her tone steady despite the thunder in her veins. I watched Lady Beatrice add a substance from a small vial to Lord Ravenscroft's glass as she passed behind him not 3 minutes ago. Harlan surged to his feet, face reddening. This is slander. My wife and I are guests of long standing. Long standing does not grant immunity to murder, Elara replied coolly. The word, murder, hung in the air like smoke. Whispers erupted. Someone called for her father. Another suggested smelling salts. The elderly Viscountess beside her original seat clutched her pearls and declared she felt faint. Elara stood alone in the eye of the storm, chin high, feeling the weight of 100 judgmental stares. Doubt flickered, had the shadows deceived her? Had candlelight played tricks, but she crushed it ruthlessly. She knew what she had seen. Then a large, warm hand closed gently but firmly around her wrist. Damien Ravenscroft had risen. He towered over the table, black coat immaculate despite the wine staining his cuff. He did not release her. Every eye tracked the contact, the Earl touching an unmarried lady in full view of the ton. He turned to the room at large, his voice quiet yet slicing through the chaos like a blade. I believe Lady Elara. The uproar that followed was immediate and thunderous. Viscount Harlan sputtered. Beatrice's porcelain mask cracked, revealing something raw and panicked beneath. Calls for the magistrate mingled with demands that Elara be removed at once. But Damien's grip on her wrist remained steady, an anchor in the tempest. He leaned close enough that only she could hear his next words, spoken against the shell of her ear. Brave, he murmured, or reckless. Possibly both. Either way, you have my attention now, Lady Elara. She met his gaze, heart racing. And you, my lord, she whispered back, have my protection, whether you wish it or not. Outside the tall windows, thunder rumbled over the estate grounds, as though the night itself approved the dangerous alliance just forged across a blood-red stain. The game had begun, and neither player intended to lose. Morning light filtered weakly through heavy velvet drapes in the Montague townhouse on Grosvenor Square, turning the breakfast room into a muted tableau of silver salvers and untouched toast. Lady Elara Montague sat alone at the long mahogany table, a stack of morning correspondence piled beside her plate like a small, accusing monument. She had not slept. The events of the previous night replayed in relentless detail, the crimson stain spreading across white damask, the collective gasp of the ton, and, most vivid of all, the steady pressure of Damien Ravenscroft's hand around her wrist as he declared, in that low, implacable voice, I believe Lady Elara. The words should have been armor. Instead, they had become a brand. Lydia burst into the room in a rustle of pink muslin, clutching a handful of letters and looking as though she had run the entire length of the corridor. It's worse than we feared, she announced without preamble, dropping the notes beside Elara's cup. Every drawing room from here to Belgravia is dissecting last night, and you, my dear cousin, are the main course. Elara slit open the first envelope with a pearl-handled knife. The note inside was from the Duchess of Ashford, once a close acquaintance of her late mother, politely withdrawing an invitation to a musical evening, owing to unforeseen circumstances. The second, from Lady Carstairs, expressed regret that their planned drive in the park must be postponed indefinitely. By the fifth, the pattern was unmistakable, doors closing, one after another, with the soft finality of coffin lids. What do they say at Brooks's? Elara asked quietly. Or White's? Men are rarely so delicate in their language. Lydia hesitated. They say you've always been highly strung. That too many novels and political pamphlets have overheated your imagination. That you sought the Earl's notice by manufacturing drama. She lowered her voice. Some are even suggesting you added the poison yourself after spilling the wine, to lend credence to your tale. Elara laughed once, sharp, humorless. Of course. A hysterical female inventing villains to capture a wealthy recluse. How terribly original. The door opened again, this time admitting her father, Lord Montague. His face, usually florid with good health and good claret, had gone grey overnight. He carried the Morning Post folded to the society column, and Alara did not need to see it to know what it contained. "My study," he said simply. "Now." The walk down the corridor felt interminable. Portraits of stern ancestors watched from gilded frames, as though already judging her unworthy of their lineage. Inside the study, sunlight slanted through tall windows onto Turkey carpets and leather-bound books no one read. Lord Montague closed the door with deliberate care. "Do you comprehend what you have done?" His voice was quiet, which was worse than shouting. "In one evening you have made our name synonymous with scandal. I have spent the morning receiving calls from men whose goodwill keeps this family solvent. They all counsel the same remedy: control your daughter, or suffer the consequences." Alara lifted her chin. "I saved a man's life. You accused a viscount and his wife of attempted murder in front of half the peerage, without proof." He sank into the chair behind his desk, suddenly looking every one of his 58 years. The physician confirmed a foreign substance in the wine, yes. But the glass had been handled by servants, spilled publicly. Anyone might have tampered with it after the fact. The Blackthorns are claiming exactly that, and painting you as an unstable girl infatuated with Ravenscroft. And you believe them? I believe we are outmatched. He rubbed a hand across his eyes. Viscount Blackthorn has offered a graceful exit. If you issue a public statement expressing regret for your misapprehension, he will consider the matter closed. No charges, no further discussion. Alara's stomach turned. You would have me lie? Allow murderers to walk free because it is convenient? I would have you alive and marriageable and safe, he retorted, voice cracking. Do you understand what awaits if you persist? Ruin. Not just yours, your sister's prospects, my political alliances, our very standing. We will be cut direct in the park, excluded from Almack's, shunned at court. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken grief. At last he added, more softly, Ravenscroft believes you. He sent a note this morning, terse, but unequivocal. He stands by your account. Then why? Because belief is not evidence. Lord Montague spread his hands helplessly. Without the vial, without witnesses beyond your word, it becomes influence against influence. And in that war, my child, we lose. A knock interrupted them. The butler entered bearing a silver salver with a single card. His lordship the Earl of Ravenscroft, he announced, and Alara's heart gave an inconvenient lurch. Her father stared at the card as though it might bite. Show him to the blue drawing-room. And Alara, tread carefully. The Earl's support is a double-edged sword. Damien Ravenscroft filled the delicate proportions of the drawing-room like a storm cloud in a teacup. Morning dress suited him as severely as evening wear, charcoal coat, crisp white linen, waistcoat of midnight silk. He stood before the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back, gray eyes assessing her with that same unnerving intensity she remembered from the night before. Lady Alara. He inclined his head. I trust one do not intrude. Not at all. She gestured to a chair, though he remained standing. Though I suspect my father would prefer correspondence to a personal call. Correspondence can be mislaid. I prefer certainty. He studied her face, searching, perhaps, for cracks in her composure. You have seen the letters. And heard the whispers. I am now either mad, malicious, or both. His mouth curved faintly, not quite a smile. I have heard worse. My response remains unchanged: anyone who credits such nonsense is beneath my notice. 3/4 of London society, then, she replied dryly. I shall have ample time for reading. An admirably philosophical outlook. He stepped closer, voice lowering. I came to inform you that I have engaged discreet investigators, former Bow Street men with no love for the aristocracy. If the Blackthorns left a trail, we will find it. But it will take time. And until then? Until then, you bleed socially. Which is why I have a proposition. Ilara's pulse quickened. What manner of proposition? A strategic one. His gaze held hers without flinching. The Blackthorns rely on society's condemnation to shield them. They expect isolation to silence you. We deny them that weapon. How? By demonstrating my complete faith in your character, publicly and unmistakably. He paused, letting the weight settle. I will court you. Openly. Every ball, every opera, every afternoon ride in the park. I will make it impossible for anyone to slight you without slighting me. She stared at him. That is, extraordinary madness. My reputation already borders on the diabolical, he said with a flicker of dark humor. Adding, besotted by a scandalous beauty, will hardly worsen it. You risk your own standing for a woman you scarcely know. I know you crossed a room to save a stranger's life. His voice softened, almost wondering. I know you have not wavered once under pressure that would break most people. And I know that courage deserves protection, not persecution. Ilara felt warmth rise in her cheeks, not embarrassment, but something far more dangerous. There would be rules, she said at last. I will not play the helpless maiden. I wish to assist in the investigation. Agreed. This ends when my name is cleared and justice served. No obligations beyond that. You have my word. She extended her hand, gloved fingers steady. Then we are allies, my lord. He took it, but instead of shaking, bowed low and brushed his lips across her knuckles, a gesture formal enough for propriety, yet lingering enough to send heat racing along her skin. Call me Damien, he murmured against her hand. If we are to convince the ton we are courting, formality feels counterproductive. Very well, Damien. The name tasted like forbidden fruit. But know that I am dreadful at feigning fragility. Good, he said, straightening, gray eyes alight with something perilously close to admiration. I have little patience for fragility. As he departed with a final, searing glance, Ilara stood alone amid the delicate blues and golds of the drawing-room, heart pounding against her ribs. She had agreed to a charade with the most dangerous man in England. And heaven help her, she was already wondering how long pretense could possibly last when everything about him felt achingly, terrifyingly real. The afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of Ravenscroft House on Park Lane, gilding the dark paneling of Damien's private study in warm amber. The room smelled of old leather, beeswax, and the faint, exotic trace of sandalwood that seemed to cling to everything the Earl owned. Maps of Ceylon plantations and railway routes covered one wall, a mahogany desk dominated the center, strewn with ledgers and correspondence that spoke of an empire managed with iron precision. Lady Ilara Montague sat in a high-backed chair opposite that desk, gloved hands folded in her lap, outwardly composed. Inwardly, she felt the tremor of stepping into the lion's den. This was their third strategy meeting, in as many days, and each visit to this house felt less like pretense and more like crossing an invisible threshold. Damien stood by the window, coat discarded, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, an informality that would have scandalized any proper chaperone, had one been present. Lydia waited downstairs under the fiction of examining the library, but Ilara suspected even the servants knew the truth. the Earl of Ravenscroft did not permit interference in his private affairs. He turned, holding 2 sheets of paper. My investigators have begun. These arrived this morning. Elara rose and crossed to him, accepting the pages. The first was a list of purchases from an apothecary in Whitechapel, small quantities of a clear, odorless liquid labeled rat poison, bought over several months by a woman signing as Mrs. B. Thorne. The second was a summary of Viscount Blackthorne's gambling debts, markers totaling nearly £20,000, held by men known to break kneecaps when interest lagged. She looked up. Enough to ruin them financially, but not enough to prove intent to murder. Not yet, Damien agreed. His voice was quiet, but she caught the undercurrent of controlled fury. The debts began accumulating 2 years ago, shortly after my father's death, when Harlan expected to inherit management of certain unentailed Ravenscroft assets. When I refused to sign over power of attorney, the losses accelerated. Elara felt a chill. You believe they tried this before? I believe my father's sudden heart seizure at 56 merits closer examination. He moved to the desk, pouring 2 small measures of brandy despite the early hour. But graves do not yield evidence easily. We must focus on the present attempt. He handed her a glass. Their fingers brushed, deliberately or accidentally, she could not tell, and warmth sparked along her skin. She took a measured sip, letting the burn steady her. Tell me about the Blackthornes, she said. You've known them longer than I. Damien leaned against the desk, arms crossed. Harlan was my father's protégé, charming, ambitious, always a step away from disaster. My father bailed him out more than once. Beatrice married him for the title and discovered too late it came with empty coffers. They have lived on credit and connections ever since. And now they seek to live on your inheritance. A muscle tightened in his jaw. They miscalculated. I am not my father. No, Elara thought, studying the hard lines of his face. You are something far more dangerous. Silence settled, not uncomfortable but charged. Outside, carriage wheels clattered on the street. Inside, the ticking of a long case clock measured the moments. You should know, he said at last, the ton is adjusting its narrative. My public attentions have forced a re-evaluation. Invitations are returning, cautiously. Some hostesses now fear excluding you more than including you. Fear is a powerful motivator, she replied dryly. Though I prefer respect. You will have both, in time. His gaze lingered on her face. You wear the strain well, but I see it nonetheless. The unexpected gentleness in his tone undid her more than any grand gesture could have. I am accustomed to being thought odd, she admitted. But never mad. It stings. He pushed away from the desk and crossed to her, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her head back. You are the sanest person in this entire affair. And the bravest. Her breath caught. They had danced at 2 balls this week, driven in the park daily, sat together at the opera, every performance calculated to convince society of his favor. Yet here, in private, the pretense felt perilously thin. Damien. He lifted a hand, not quite touching her cheek. I promised no obligations beyond justice. I keep my promises. But I will not pretend I do not feel, he searched her eyes. Something more than strategy. The air between them crackled. Elara felt the pull of him, dark, magnetic, terrifying, like standing at the edge of a cliff and discovering she wanted to leap. I feel it too, she whispered. The admission cost her, she was not a woman given to vulnerability. But we cannot let it distract us. His smile was slow, rueful. Then we are both doomed, because you distract me constantly. A knock at the door shattered the moment. The butler entered with a silver tray bearing a single letter sealed in black wax. From Whitechapel, my lord. The man you engaged insisted immediate delivery. Damien broke the seal and scanned the contents. His expression hardened. What is it? A former maid of Lady Beatrice's, dismissed without reference 3 weeks ago, wishes to speak. She claims to have seen something the night of the gala. Ilara's pulse quickened. When? Tonight. She fears reprisal and will only meet after dark, in a tavern near the docks. Danger prickled along her spine. You cannot go alone. I had no intention of doing so. He met her eyes, challenge and invitation mingled. But it is not a place for a lady. I ceased being merely a lady the moment I spilled your wine across Blackwood's table. She set down her glass with decision. I am coming. For a long moment he studied her, assessing, weighing risk against resolve. Then he nodded once. Very well. But you will wear something less memorable. A glint of amusement warmed the grey. I have a footman's livery that might fit. She laughed despite herself. You are jesting. Only slightly. He sobered. Ilara, if anything feels wrong, you leave immediately. No arguments. Only if you promise the same. They regarded each other across the small space, two stubborn souls forging terms in a war neither had chosen. At last he inclined his head. Agreed. As she took her leave, Lydia waiting downstairs with wide, curious eyes, Ilara felt the shift deep in her bones. What had begun as alliance was becoming partnership in every sense. They were hunting predators now, together, and the thrill of it sang in her blood. Tonight they would venture into London's shadows. And whatever waited there, they would face it side by side. The bonds between them, forged in spilled wine and shared danger, were growing stronger, deeper, and far more perilous than either had anticipated. But neither, in that moment, would have chosen any other path. The week that followed was a delicate, dangerous dance. Damien Ravenscroft proved relentless in his public courtship. Each afternoon at precisely 3 o'clock his sleek black town coach drawn by matched greys appeared before the Montague residence. He took Ilara driving along the fashionable circuit of Hyde Park, the barouche landau open to every curious gaze. While other couples exchanged banalities about the weather, Damien and Ilara spoke of railway monopolies in India, the Corn Laws, and the newest theories on women's education, subjects that left eavesdroppers baffled and dowagers clutching their reticules in horror. Society watched, fascinated and appalled in equal measure. Invitations began to trickle back, hesitant at first, then in a cautious flood. Hostesses who had cut Ilara direct now feared offending the powerful Earl more than harboring a suspected hysteric. The narrative shifted. If Ravenscroft, a man renowned for avoiding entanglement, had chosen this particular young woman, perhaps there was substance beneath the scandal after all. Yet the Blackthorns fought back with venomous subtlety. At every assembly they attended, whispers followed Ilara like smoke, overheated imagination, dangerous radical tendencies, an unhealthy obsession with the Earl. Lady Beatrice, serene in public, let fall delicate hints that Ilara had always been prone to fanciful notions. The strain began to tell. One evening after a particularly grueling ball at Almack's, where Ilara had endured a dozen veiled insults disguised as concern, she returned home pale and silent. Lydia found her in the library long past midnight, staring into the dying fire. You cannot let them wear you down, Lydia said softly, settling beside her. They already have, Ilara admitted, voice raw. Every smile feels like a battle. Every curtsy a surrender I refuse to give. She pressed fingers to her temples. I begin to wonder if the cost is too high. Lydia took her hand. It will be worth it when the truth is known. If the truth is ever known. The next afternoon, Damien arrived earlier than usual. His expression, when Alara joined him in the drawing room, was grimmer than she had yet seen. "My investigators have uncovered more," he said without preamble, guiding her to a secluded window seat. "Harlan forged documents years ago, papers that would have named him trustee of significant Ravenscroft holdings upon my father's death. When I challenged them after the funeral, he backed down. But the forgeries still exist, hidden somewhere." Alara's heart quickened. "Proof of long intent. Proof we cannot yet lay hands on." He hesitated, then continued, "There is worse. A second apothecary, this one in Bond Street, sold substantial quantities of arsenic to a veiled lady matching Beatrice's description. For vermin control on the estate, she claimed. Enough for gradual poisoning." He nodded. "Enough to sicken a man over months, mimic natural decline. Enough, perhaps, for my father." The words hung heavy between them. Alara felt the familiar surge of anger, and beneath it, a colder fear. The Blackthorns were not merely desperate, they were practiced. "We are closing in," Damien said. "Which makes the next move critical. They will grow bolder, more vicious, unless we change the ground beneath their feet." He rose, pacing with restrained energy. "I have a proposal, one that will alter everything." Alara braced herself. Another public gesture. "More than that." He stopped before her, gray eyes intense. "I wish to announce a formal engagement. Not merely courtship, an understanding between us, proclaimed openly at the Duchess of Richmond's ball next week." She stared at him, breath-catching. "An engagement. A false one, if you prefer," he said quickly. "A continuation of our strategy. It will bind you irrevocably to my protection. Any attack on your character becomes an attack on my future countess, an insult no one will risk. It buys us time, forces the Blackthorns to hesitate." Alara's mind raced. The implications were staggering. An announced engagement, even a pretended one, would tie their fates together in the eyes of the world. Ending it later would require delicate maneuvering, scandal would still cling. Yet the shield it offered was undeniable. "And if we cannot end it cleanly?" she asked quietly. His gaze did not waver. "Then we do not end it at all." The air thickened. For simple words, yet they shifted the room like an earthquake. "Damien. I promised no obligations beyond justice," he said, voice low. "I stand by that. But I will not lie to you, Alara. This ceased to be mere alliance for me weeks ago. Every conversation, every shared danger, every moment I watch you face down a room full of vipers with that unflinching chin," he broke off, a faint, rueful smile touching his mouth. "I am lost. Utterly and willingly." Her heart pounded so fiercely she feared he could hear it. She had felt the pull growing, each brush of gloved hands during a waltz, each lingering glance across crowded ballrooms, each late-night discussion in his study that stretched far beyond strategy. But hearing it spoken, raw and unguarded, was different. "I need time," she said at last, the words trembling. "This is not a small thing you ask. Take all the time you require." He reached out, slowly enough that she could withdraw, and tucked an escaped curl behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, warm and steady. "But know this, whether the engagement is real or masquerade, my commitment to you is absolute. I will see the Blackthorns brought to account, and I will see you safe. Always." Alara turned her face into his palm for the briefest moment, allowing herself the luxury of his touch. "Then let it be the masquerade," she whispered. "For now. Announce it at the Duchess's ball. We will play the enamored couple better than any Drury Lane performance." Relief and something deeper flickered across his features. "As you wish." He bowed over her hand with formal grace, yet his lips pressed a fraction longer than propriety allowed. Until the ball, then, my future countess, he murmured. After he left, Elara remained by the window, watching his coach disappear into the bustle of Grosvenor Square. Her reflection stared back, cheeks flushed, eyes brighter than they had been in weeks. A masquerade, she had called it. Yet as her fingers touched the places had warmed her skin, she wondered how long any mask could hold when the feelings beneath it burned so fiercely true. The Duchess of Richmond's ball was 3 nights away. In that time, London would hold its breath. And when the announcement came, ring glittering on her finger, Damien's hand possessive at her waist, the ton would gasp, the blackthorns would pale, and Elara Montague would step fully into the storm she had helped summon. Masquerade or destiny, the die was cast. And heaven help anyone who stood in their way. The Duchess of Richmond's ball was the pinnacle of the London season, a glittering crush of silk, diamonds, and ambition beneath the painted ceilings of Richmond House. Every chandelier blazed, every mirror reflected 100 versions of the same triumphant scene. And at the heart of it stood Lady Elara Montague on the arm of Damien Ravenscroft, a sapphire betrothal ring, hurriedly procured from the family vaults, glinting on her left hand. The announcement had been made an hour earlier, with perfect theatrical timing. Damien had led her onto the ballroom floor just as the orchestra struck up a waltz, then raised his voice above the music with quiet, unassailable authority. I have the honor to inform the company that Lady Elara Montague has consented to become my wife. The reaction had been everything they hoped and feared, gasps, hurried whispers, a ripple of applause quickly taken up by those wise enough to align themselves early. The Blackthorns, standing near the refreshment tables, had gone deathly pale, Harlan's hand tightening on his champagne flute until the stem threatened to snap, Beatrice's smile freezing into something brittle and terrible. Now, as Damien guided Elara through the waltz, the ton watched with avid curiosity. They made a striking pair, he in severe black, she in ivory silk threaded with silver, golden hair crowned with pearls. To outward eyes they were the perfect portrait of besotted lovers, his hand possessive at her waist, her gaze lifted to his with practiced adoration. In truth, the dance was strategy. They are watching every step, Damien murmured, voice pitched for her ears alone. Smile as though I have just whispered something scandalous. Elara obeyed, letting laughter rise in her throat. If only they knew you are reciting railway profit margins. His mouth curved. Far more scandalous than poetry, in certain circles. The music swelled, carrying them past clusters of whispering dowagers and calculating mammas. Elara caught fragments, extraordinary match, still say the girl is unbalanced, Ravenscroft must be bewitched. Each barb landed like a pinprick, but Damien's steady grip anchored her. When the waltz ended, he did not release her immediately. Instead he bent his head, lips brushing the gloved knuckles of her ring hand in a gesture intimate enough to set tongues wagging for weeks. Steady, he whispered against her skin. We are winning. Yet victory felt hollow. In the days that followed, the false engagement became a gilded cage. They were invited everywhere, required everywhere, to display their happiness for public consumption. Morning calls, afternoon drives, evening assemblies, a relentless parade of performance. Elara smiled until her cheeks ached, answered endless congratulations with practiced grace, endured sly questions about wedding dates and bridal settlements. At night, alone in her chamber, the mask slipped. She stared at the sapphire on her finger, beautiful, heavy, borrowed, and felt the walls closing in. The investigation progressed, but slowly. Damien's men traced more arsenic purchases, uncovered desperate letters from Harlan to moneylenders, even located a clerk willing to swear he had prepared forged documents years earlier. Yet nothing was conclusive enough for a magistrate. The Blackthorns, sensing the net tightening, retreated into impeccable public virtue while privately sharpening their claws. One afternoon in Damien's study, Elara pored over a new report. Beatrice had been seen visiting a pawnshop in a less fashionable quarter, disposing of family jewels to pay pressing debts. They are cornered animals now, Damien said, standing behind her chair, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Dangerous. His touch, once a spark, had become both comfort and torment. Every casual brush of fingers, every lingering glance during their public charade, fed a hunger neither dared name fully. "I dreamed of her last night," Elara confessed quietly. "Beatrice. Standing over your bed with that vial, smiling." Damien's hand tightened. "You should not torment yourself." "How can I not? This ring," she twisted the sapphire. "It protects me, yes. But it also chains me to the lie. I begin to forget which smiles are real." He turned her chair to face him, kneeling so their eyes were level. "Then let me remind you. Every look I give you in public is only half pretense. Every time I touch you, I fight the urge to do far more. This began as strategy, Elara, but it has become the truest thing in my life." Her breath caught. "Damien." A sharp rap at the door interrupted. The butler entered, face grim. "My lord, a package has arrived." "No direction, delivered by hand." The footman who accepted it says the bearer vanished into the crowd. Damien rose, breaking open the plain wrapping. Inside lay a single white glove, lady's size, stained with dark, rust-colored spots, and a note in elegant, slanting script. "A warning, my lord. Some secrets are better buried. Accidents befall even the most careful brides." Elara felt the blood drain from her face. The glove was hers, lost weeks ago at a garden party hosted by Beatrice Blackthorne. Damien's expression turned lethal. "They are escalating." Fear and fury warred within her. "They think to frighten me into silence. They underestimate you." He crushed the note in his fist. "But I will not risk you further. From tonight, you will have a guard, discreet, but constant. I am not some fragile ornament." "No," he said fiercely, "you are the woman who saved my life and captured my heart. I will not lose you to their venom." The words hung between them, raw and undeniable. That evening at the opera, they sat in Damien's private box, the performance a blur of sound and color. During the interval, as fashionable crowds milled below, Elara felt the weight of watchful eyes. Across the auditorium, in a box directly opposite, sat the Blackthorns. Beatrice lifted her opera glasses, meeting Elara's gaze with a smile sharp as broken glass. Elara did not look away. Later, in the carriage returning home, silence stretched taut. "I hate this," she said at last, voice breaking. "The pretense, the fear, the constant calculation. I feel as though I am losing myself." Damien reached across the space between them, taking her hand. "You are not lost. You are fighting. And you are not fighting alone." She turned to him, moonlight striping his face through the window. "What are we, Damien? Truly?" He brought her hand to his lips. "We are two people caught in a storm we did not summon. But I know what I want when the storm passes, you. Not the masquerade. You." Tears pricked her eyes. "I want that too. More than I feared possible. But I am terrified of what it costs." "Then let us end the cost," he said quietly. "Let us finish this, together, and claim what is real." The carriage stopped before her home. He escorted her to the door, pausing beneath the portico. "Soon," he promised, brushing a thumb across her cheek. "Soon this veil lifts, and we face only truth." As she lay awake that night, the sapphire heavy on her finger, Elara felt the shift within her. The masquerade had served its purpose, it had protected her, drawn the enemy into the open, and, inescapably, bound her heart to Damien's. But veils of deception could not hold forever. The truth was coming, swift and merciless. And when it arrived, it would either free them, or destroy everything they had built. The threat arrived on a morning thick with London fog, seeping through the cracks of the Montague household like the poison it promised. Elara found the package on the silver salver in the entrance hall, a small, plain box tied with twine, no card, no seal. The footman swore it had been left by a ragged boy who vanished into the mist before questions could be asked. Curiosity overriding caution, she carried it to the morning room and cut the string. Inside lay a single white rose, its petals bruised and browning at the edges, and a lock of golden hair bound with black ribbon. Her hair. Cut from her brush, perhaps, or stolen from her maid. A folded note accompanied it, the same elegant, slanting hand as before. Pretty things wilt so quickly when deprived of light. Withdraw your accusations, or watch everything you love follow. Her hands trembled as she read it a second time. Not fear for herself, no, the blackthorns had miscalculated there, but the implication that those around her were now targets. Lydia. Her father. Damien. She burned the note in the fireplace, but the words lingered like smoke. That afternoon she went to Ravenscroft House unannounced, the box clutched beneath her cloak. Damien was in conference with his investigators, but dismissed them the moment she entered his study, reading the strain in her face. She showed him the contents without speaking. His reaction was immediate and terrifying. The controlled mask slipped, revealing something primal beneath, eyes gone winter cold, jaw carved from granite. He took the rose between thumb and forefinger as though it were a venomous insect and crushed it, petals scattering like drops of blood across the carpet. They have crossed a line, he said, voice deadly quiet. This ends. He summoned his most trusted men, former Bow Street runners hardened by years in London's underbelly, and issued orders, double guards on the Montague residence, discreet shadows on Lydia and Lord Montague, a watch on every known Blackthorn associate. Then he turned to Alara. You will not leave this house without escort. Not for a drive, not for a morning call, not for air. You cannot imprison me. I can and will protect you. He stepped close, hands framing her face with surprising gentleness given the fury radiating from him. I have lost too much already. I will not lose you. The kiss that followed was not gentle. It was claim and desperation, weeks of restraint shattering in the wake of threat. She met him with equal fire, fingers tangling in his hair, pressing against the hard length of him as though proximity alone could shield them both. When they broke apart, both breathing raggedly, the air between them crackled. This changes nothing about our plan, she said fiercely. It only makes justice more urgent. He rested his forehead against hers. Then we strike harder. But the Blackthorn struck first. 2 nights later, at Lady Carstairs' musical soirée, a carefully chosen battlefield where half the ton gathered to hear a celebrated Italian soprano, Alara and Damien arrived together, outwardly serene. The performance had just concluded when Viscount Harlan approached them in the crush of the refreshment room, face arranged in sorrowful lines. Ravenscroft, he began, voice pitched to Carrie, a private word. For the sake of old friendships. Damien's expression remained marble. We have nothing private to discuss. Harlan glanced around, ensuring an audience. Come now. Surely we can resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding like gentlemen. My wife is distraught, quite ill, in fact, from the strain of these baseless accusations. Beatrice appeared then, as if on cue, pale and trembling on Harlan's arm. She looked fragile enough to shatter, eyes red-rimmed, voice breaking as she addressed Alara directly. How can you persist in this cruelty? I have never wished harm to anyone, least of all Lord Ravenscroft. If I have offended in some way, a delicate sob escaped her. I beg you, for Christian charity, withdraw your claims. The room stilled. All pretense of conversation ceased, every ear strained toward the unfolding drama. Alara felt heat rise in her cheeks, not embarrassment, but rage. I withdraw nothing, my lady. I stand by every word. Gasps rippled outward. Beatrice pressed a handkerchief to her lips. Then you condemn us without trial. We are ruined, shunned, because of a girl's overheated fancy. Harlan laid a protective hand on his wife's shoulder. Enough, my dear. Let the magistrate decide. He turned to Damien. Though I warn you, my lord, when this is proven false, the slander will fall upon your house. Even your great name may not withstand it. Damien's smile was lethal. I welcome the magistrate's scrutiny. Perhaps he will also examine certain purchases of arsenic, and forged documents bearing your signature. Harlan's composure cracked for a fraction of a second, long enough for Elara to see raw panic beneath. Then Beatrice swayed dramatically, clutching her husband's arm. I feel faint, the vapors, please, air. They retreated through a path that parted like the Red Sea, leaving whispers exploding in their wake. Elara felt every stare like needles. Some looked sympathetic to Beatrice's performance, others, calculating. A few, those who had begun to believe Damien's support meant something, offered hesitant nods. But the damage was done. By morning, the papers carried veiled accounts, a certain noble couple vindicated, and questions raised about recent sensational claims. Invitations slowed again. Old allies sent regrets. Even Lydia's suitors grew scarce. The lowest point came 3 days later. Elara received a letter from her father, written in a hand that shook. My dearest daughter. I have borne much for love of you, but the pressure grows intolerable. Creditors circle, old friends turn away, and I fear for your sister's future. Lord Blackthorn has renewed his offer, a quiet retraction, a statement of mistake due to poor light and nerves, and all will be forgiven. No charges. No further pursuit. I am an old man, Elara. I cannot fight this war. Consider, I beg you, the cost to us all. Your loving father. She read it in the garden, frost glittering on the dormant roses, and felt something inside her fracture. That evening she went to Damien. He was in his study, maps and reports spread before him, shadows beneath his eyes speaking of sleepless nights. When she entered, he rose immediately, concern sharpening his features. What has happened? She handed him the letter without a word. He read it in silence, then folded it with deliberate care and placed it on the desk. Your father is frightened, he said quietly. As any man would be, watching his world crumble. I know. Her voice cracked. And part of me wants to give him peace. To end this. To retreat and let them win. Damien crossed to her, taking her cold hands in his. But you will not. I do not know if I can continue. The admission cost her everything. Every step forward costs blood, my family's comfort, my reputation, perhaps Lydia's happiness. What if we are wrong? What if the evidence never comes? He pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she were the only solid thing in a tilting world. We are not wrong. And the evidence will come. But even if it did not, even if the world branded us both mad, I would still choose this path because you walk it. She clung to him, tears finally spilling. I am so tired of fighting. Then let me fight for a while. His voice was fierce against her hair. Rest here, in my arms. You are not alone, Elara. You will never be alone again. They stood that way long into the night, the fire burning low, London's distant clamor muffled by thick walls. For the first time since the gala, Elara allowed herself to lean fully on someone else. But even in that fragile shelter, doubt gnawed. The Blackthorns had fractured her alliances, family, society, perhaps even her own certainty. And in the cold hours before dawn, as Damien held her while she slept at last, he stared into the dying embers with murder in his eyes. They had hurt her. Now they would pay. The fog clung to London like a shroud the night they met the maid. Elara stood in the shadowed courtyard behind Ravenscroft House, cloaked in a plain dark wool gown borrowed from one of the housemaids, her golden hair hidden beneath a simple mob cap. Damien waited beside her, similarly disguised in the rough coat and cap of a working man. No trace of the elegant earl remained. A closed carriage, unmarked and uncrested, stood ready with a trusted driver on the box. "You are certain?" Damien asked quietly, grey eyes searching her face in the lantern light. "I have never been more certain." Elara's voice was steady, the earlier fracture mended by resolve. "We need her testimony. I will not hide while you take all the risk." He gave a short nod, though worry lingered in the set of his mouth. "Stay close." They rode in silence through the city's darker veins, past the glittering West End into the labyrinth of Whitechapel and the docks. The fog-muffled sound, distant shouts of stevedores, the creak of ships at anchor, the splash of the Thames against slime-slick wharves. At last the carriage halted outside a dingy tavern called the Anchor and Chain. Inside, the air was thick with pipe smoke, gin fumes, and the low rumble of rough voices. Damien guided Elara to a corner table half hidden by a grimy partition. They had barely settled when a slight figure in a worn cloak slipped through the door and scanned the room nervously. The woman, Mary Ellis, formerly lady's maid to Beatrice Blackthorne, approached with hesitant steps. She was young, perhaps 20, with tired eyes and hands that twisted anxiously in her apron. "My lord," she whispered, voice trembling. Damien inclined his head. "Miss Ellis. Thank you for coming. This is my associate." He did not name Elara, safer that way. Mary sat, glancing over her shoulder. "I shouldn't be here. If Lady Beatrice knew." "She will not know," Elara said gently. "But we need your help to stop her." Mary swallowed. "I was let go without reference 3 weeks past. Said I was light-fingered, but it was a lie. Truth is, I found something I wasn't meant to." She reached into her reticule and drew out a small glass vial, stoppered and half-filled with clear liquid. She slid it across the scarred table. Elara's breath caught. It was identical to the one she had glimpsed that fateful night at Blackwood Hall. "I found it hidden behind her ladyship's jewel case," Mary continued, voice low. "When I asked what it was, thinking it perfume, she flew into a rage. Said I was spying, dismissed me on the spot. But I'd heard things before that. Arguments with his lordship about money running out. Her saying, 'Patience, Harlan. A little at a time and no one will suspect.' Him answering, 'Make certain it cannot be traced.'" Damien's hand closed carefully around the vial. "You are willing to swear to this?" Mary nodded, eyes filling. "I've a sick mother and no place now. If you can promise me work, honest work, I'll tell a magistrate everything." "You have my word," Damien said. "My solicitor will draw up a statement tomorrow, and you will have a position in my household by week's end, under my protection." Relief softened the maid's features. She provided more, dates of overheard conversations, descriptions of visitors late at night, even the name of the apothecary Beatrice favored in Bond Street. When she finished, Damien pressed a small purse into her hand, enough to see her and her mother comfortable until arrangements were made, and arranged for one of his men to escort her safely home. As the carriage rattled back toward Mayfair, Elara stared at the vial in Damien's gloved palm. "This is it," she said quietly. "Combined with the receipts, the debts, the forged papers your men have traced, this is enough." "Enough for a warrant, perhaps," he agreed. "But the Blackthorns still command loyalty in high places. We need more than evidence, we need confession." Elara met his gaze. "Then we give them no choice." They spent the next 2 days in Damien's study, poring over every scrap of information like generals planning a final assault. Maps of the Blackthorn estate, lists of servants, financial records, everything laid bare. By the end, a plan emerged, a private dinner at Ravenscroft House, intimate enough to seem conciliatory, select enough to include a magistrate sympathetic to Damien's cause and 2 peers whose support would sway opinion. The bait, a whispered rumor, carefully planted, that Damien intended to publicly end the engagement and withdraw all accusations, offering the Blackthorns a dignified retreat. They will come, Alara predicted, tracing the invitation list with one finger. Pride will demand it. They will believe they have won. Damien's smile was sharp. And we will ensure they confess their victory too soon. In the quiet hours before dawn on the second night, with papers strewn across the desk and the fire burned low, Alara looked up to find Damien watching her. "What is it?" "You," he said simply. "In the midst of all this ugliness, you shine. I have never known anyone with your courage." Warmth flooded her chest. She rose and crossed to him, settling onto the arm of his chair. "I am only courageous because you stand with me." He pulled her fully into his lap, arms wrapping around her waist. "No more masquerade, Alara. When this ends, when they are brought down, I want the engagement real. I want you as my wife, not my ally. I want mornings waking beside you, evenings debating politics over brandy, years of watching you change the world with that brilliant mind." Her heart stuttered. "And if society never fully forgives the scandal? Then we will build our own society." He brushed a curl from her forehead. "But I believe they will come around. They always do when power speaks." She leaned in, kissing him slowly, deeply, no hurried passion this time, but a promise. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his. "Yes," she whispered. "When this ends, I will marry you. Truly. Because somewhere between spilled wine and forged alliances, I fell irrevocably in love with you, Damien Ravenscroft." Joy flared in his gray eyes, bright as sunrise. He kissed her again, reverent now, sealing the vow. The threads of resolve had woven tight, evidence in hand, trap prepared, hearts aligned. The Blackthorns believed they had fractured their enemies. They could not have been more wrong. In 2 nights' time, at a table set for reckoning, the final act would play out. And when the curtain fell, only truth, and love, would remain standing. Ravenscroft House gleamed like a weapon unsheathed. Every candelabrum blazed, every mirror reflected light until the dining room seemed afloat in liquid gold. The long mahogany table was set for only 10, intimate by ducal standards, yet every place carried the weight of destiny. White orchids spilled from silver aprons, crystal sparkled, the air carried the faint, exotic scent of Damien's private hothouse blooms. Alara stood before the pier glass in the adjoining salon, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her gown of deep midnight silk. The sapphire betrothal ring caught the light like a captive star. She looked every inch the future countess, poised, radiant, untouchable, yet her pulse thundered with the knowledge that tonight the masquerade ended. Damien appeared behind her in the mirror, impossibly handsome in formal black, his cravat a perfect cascade of white. His hands settled on her shoulders, warm and steady. "Ready?" he asked quietly. She met his eyes in the reflection. "More than ready. Let us finish this." He pressed a kiss to the curve of her neck, just below the pearl choker that hid the frantic beat of her heart. "Then come, my love. The trap is sprung." The guests arrived in careful order of precedence. First the magistrate, Sir Robert Hale, a shrewd, impartial man whose presence lent official weight. Then Lord Carstairs and Lord Wilmington, 2 peers whose public support would sway the ton. Ilara's father came next, his face lined with worry but pride shining through when he saw her on Damien's arm. Lydia followed, eyes bright with suppressed excitement. Last, fashionably late, came Viscount and Lady Blackthorne. Harlan's smile was polished brass, Beatrice's pallor was expertly masked by rouge. They entered as though attending a victory celebration, Harlan clapping Damien on the shoulder with forced bonhomie. Ravenscroft. A handsome table. And Lady Ilara, radiant as ever. His gaze flicked to the sapphire. Felicitations again on your happy news. Beatrice curtsied, her emeralds flashing. Such a relief to put unpleasantness behind us. Damien's answering smile was winter. Indeed. Shall we dine? The meal unfolded with exquisite civility. Courses arrived in perfect succession, clear turtle soup, salmon and lobster sauce, saddle of mutton with caper dressing, delicate removes of asparagus and artichokes. Wine flowed, Damien's finest claret, poured with deliberate care by footmen who never let a glass empty. Conversation remained light at first, shipping fortunes, the Queen's health, the latest exhibition at the Royal Academy. Ilara played her part flawlessly, laughing at the right moments, directing questions with graceful ease. Beneath the table, Damien's hand found hers, fingers interlaced in silent reassurance. During the third remove, he rose. My friends, he began, voice carrying effortlessly, I have asked you here for a purpose beyond mere pleasure. Recent months have been turbulent. Accusations have flown, reputations strained. Tonight, I wish to set matters right. Harlan leaned forward, eyes gleaming with anticipation. Beatrice's knuckles whitened around her wine glass. Damien continued, rumors have circulated that I intend to end my engagement to Lady Ilara and withdraw all charges of misconduct. I wished the Blackthorns to hear it from my own lips. A beat of silence. Harlan's smile widened. Generous of you, Ravenscroft. Wise, even. No need to prolong. Damien lifted a hand. Allow me to finish. He gestured, and the butler entered bearing a small lacquered box. From it Damien withdrew the vial Mary Ellis had delivered, still containing its damning clear liquid. Perhaps you recognize this, Lady Blackthorne. Beatrice's composure cracked, color drained from her face. It was recovered from your jewel case by your former maid, Damien continued calmly. Analysis confirms arsenic trioxide, the same compound found dissolved in my wine the night of the Blackwood Gala. Harlan surged halfway from his chair. Preposterous. Planted evidence. Sir Robert Hale raised a restraining hand. Let his lordship speak, Viscount. Damien laid out the rest with surgical precision, apothecary receipts signed in a hand remarkably similar to Beatrice's, gambling debts totaling £20,000, forged documents prepared years earlier that would have named Harlan trustee of Ravenscroft Estates. Each revelation landed like a hammer blow. Beatrice's breath came in shallow gasps, Harlan's face passed from red to ashen. And finally, Damien said, producing a folded paper, a sworn statement from Miss Mary Ellis, detailing conversations she overheard, discussions of gradual dosing to mimic illness, of patience until the obstacle was removed. Beatrice made a strangled sound. Lies, all of it. That girl was dismissed for theft. Yet she produces the vial you thought safely hidden. Damien's voice remained even, but steel ran through it. And we have the testimony of the Bond Street apothecary who sold you the arsenic, for estate vermin, you claimed. 3 separate purchases. Harlan slammed a fist on the table, crystal jumping. You cannot prove intent. Damien's smile was razor-thin. Then explain this. He nodded to the butler, who opened the dining room doors. Two constables entered, accompanied by Damien's most trusted investigator. Beatrice stared at them as though they were apparitions. What is the meaning of this? Sir Robert rose. Viscount Blackthorne, Lady Blackthorne, I hold a warrant for your arrest on suspicion of attempted murder. Harlan blustered, on whose authority? Mine, the magistrate replied quietly. Supported by evidence that appears, frankly, overwhelming. Beatrice turned wildly to her husband. Harlan. He gripped her arm, voice dropping to a hiss. Say nothing. But panic had shattered her careful mask. We only meant to make him ill. Not kill him, not at first. The debts were crushing us, your father promised. She stopped, realizing too late what she had admitted. The room froze. Damien's voice cut through the silence like a blade. My father. You poisoned him too. Beatrice's hands flew to her mouth, but the words were already out. Harlan sank back into his chair, defeated. It was meant to be temporary, he muttered. Just enough to gain control of the unentailed funds. We never intended, but he grew worse so quickly. Elara felt ice coil in her stomach. Beside her, Damien stood motionless, but she felt the tremor that ran through him, the grief and fury finally given shape. Sir Robert signaled the constables. Take them. Beatrice shrieked as iron cuffs closed around her wrists, an unearthly sound that echoed off the crystal and silver. Harlan did not resist, only stared at Damien with dull hatred. As they were led away, Beatrice twisted for one last look at Elara. This is your doing, she spat. You meddling. Damien stepped forward, shielding Elara with his body. No. This is justice. You chose poison. We chose truth. The doors closed behind the Blackthorns, cutting off Beatrice's sobs. Silence reigned for a long moment. Then Lord Carstairs raised his glass. To truth, he said simply. And to the courage of Lady Elara Montague, without whom it might never have prevailed. Glasses rose around the table. To Lady Elara. She felt tears threaten, but blinked them back. Damien's hand found hers again, gripping tightly. Later, after the remaining guests had departed, magistrate with prisoners in tow, peers with promises of full support in the House of Lords, Elara and Damien stood alone in the dining room. The table remained uncleared, a battlefield strewn with half-eaten splendor and overturned wine. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she might vanish. It is finished, she whispered against his chest. No, he murmured into her hair. It is only beginning. Outside, dawn was breaking over London, pale light gilding the fog. Inside, two hearts, scarred, tempered, unbreakable, beat finally in unshadowed peace. The reckoning had come. And love, fierce and victorious, remained. The wedding of Damien Ravenscroft, Earl of Ravenscroft, to Lady Elara Montague took place on a crisp morning in early spring 1889, in the ancient chapel of St. George's, Hanover Square. London society turned out in force, not out of mere curiosity now, but genuine admiration. The scandal that had once threatened to consume them had, through sheer courage and irrefutable truth, transformed into the season's most romantic legend. Elara walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her gown of ivory silk and Brussels lace shimmering like moonlight on water. Orange blossoms crowned her golden hair, the famous Ravenscroft sapphires, reset as a wedding gift, gleamed at her throat and ears. But it was the radiance in her hazel eyes, the unshakable joy in her smile, that drew every gaze. At the altar waited Damien, tall and impossibly handsome in formal black, his grey eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made the vast church feel intimate. When her father placed her hand in his, Damien's fingers closed around hers as though she were the only anchor in his world. The vows were spoken with quiet conviction, no tremor in either voice, only certainty. When the bishop pronounced them husband and wife, Damien kissed her not with restrained propriety, but with the deep, reverent passion of a man who had nearly lost everything and now held it forever. The wedding breakfast at Ravenscroft House rivaled any coronation feast. Champagne flowed, toasts rang out from peers who had once doubted and now championed them. Lydia, radiant as maid of honor, caught Alara's bouquet with a laugh that promised her own happiness was near. In the quiet moments between congratulations, Damien drew Alara onto the terrace overlooking the gardens. "Happy, Countess," he murmured, arms circling her waist from behind. "Impossibly so," she answered, leaning back against him. "Though I still expect to wake and find it all a dream." "Then let me remind you it is real." He turned her in his arms and kissed her thoroughly, heedless of any watchful eyes from the windows. Their first year of marriage was a revelation. Damien proved an attentive, passionate husband who delighted in her mind as much as her beauty. He converted a sunlit room overlooking the park into a private study for her, lined with books on politics, philosophy, and reform. There, Alara began writing the essays that would soon appear, signed openly as the Countess of Ravenscroft, in the quarterly reviews, sharp, eloquent calls for women's education, legal rights, and philanthropic reform. Society, ever fickle, discovered that hosting the controversial countess brought cachet rather than risk. Their salons became the most sought-after evenings in London. Thinkers, writers, even radical MPs gathered to debate under crystal chandeliers while Damien watched Alara hold court with quiet pride. "You have made me respectable," he teased one evening, as they prepared for yet another gathering. "Never," she replied, straightening his cravat. "Merely fashionable." Their passion never dimmed. Arguments, fierce, intellectual battles over policy or poetry, ended inevitably in laughter and tangled sheets. Reconstructions were spectacular. "You fight unfairly," Alara gasped one dawn, hair spilled across his pillow. "You married a strategist," he murmured against her skin. Surrender was inevitable. 2 years after the wedding, their son arrived, Edward Damien Montague Ravenscroft, heir to the earldom, with his father's dark hair and his mother's storm-bright hazel eyes. Damien, the man once feared as cold and unyielding, wept unashamedly when he first held the tiny, squalling bundle. "He is perfect," he whispered, voice breaking. "As are you," Alara answered, exhausted and euphoric. Edward grew into a spirited child, forever escaping his nurse to explore the gardens or Damien's study. By his 4th birthday he could recite the names of every ship in the Ravenscroft fleet and argue, badly, against bedtime with his mother's own logic. A daughter followed 3 years later, Clara Beatrice, named for Alara's mother, with golden curls and a laugh that filled the house like sunlight. She had her father wrapped around her finger from the first coup. Through the years, the legend of how the Earl and Countess met never faded. At family gatherings, Edward and Clara begged for the story, the spilled wine, the dangerous Duke, as they called him, the brave lady who saved him. Damien and Alara would exchange glances over the children's heads, smiling at the simplified tale. "It began with poison," Damien would say solemnly. "And ended with truth," Alara would finish. On their 10th anniversary, Damien arranged a private dinner in the same dining room where the reckoning had occurred. The table was set for 2, candles flickered as they had that fateful night, orchids spilled from the same silver vases. He presented her with a velvet case containing a new sapphire pendant, smaller than the famous parure, but flawless. "For the woman who turned darkness into light," he said simply. Alara's eyes filled. "And for the man who believed me when no one else would." They made love that night with the same urgency as their earliest days, yet deepened by years of shared joy and triumph. Time silvered Damien's raven hair at the temples, faint lines framed Alara's eyes from laughter more than worry. Their love only grew fiercer, more tender. Alara's essays became books, reforms she championed, girls' schools, married women's property rights, became law. Damien used his influence and wealth to fund hospitals, libraries, and scholarships in her name. When, many decades later, they lay side by side in the family vault beneath the Ravenscroft chapel, the inscription carved on their shared stone read, "Here lie Damien and Alara Ravenscroft." He believed her. She saved him. Together they changed the world. It was, those who knew their story agreed, the perfect epitaph for the most extraordinary love London had ever seen. And in the gardens above, their great-grandchildren played among the roses, chasing legends whispered on the wind, of a poisoned glass, a spilled wine that stained a table like blood, and 3 simple words that altered 2 lives forever. I believe you. Sometimes, the greatest romances do not begin with love at first sight, but with trust at the darkest moment. Damien and Alara proved that courage, his to believe, hers to speak, could conquer poison, scandal, and time itself. Their echoes linger still, in every woman who raises her voice unafraid, in every man who chooses truth over convenience, in every love that refuses to bend to the world's demands. A legacy forged in fire, tempered by trust, and eternal.